The wounded deer had led Crow Blackwell 3 miles up the mountain, a crimson trail painting the snow. It was a long, hard track since dawn, all for the promise of fresh meat. But when he found the animal, sprawled near a wall of weathered timber and rusted iron, the hunt was the last thing on his mind. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The deer's leg was mangled, caught tight in a steel trap. The kind miners used. The kind that snapped bone like a dry twig. But that made no sense. Not here. Every territorial survey, every map he'd ever seen, called this section of the Rockies worthless. Just granite and timber, nothing more. A mountain of dead rock. So why was someone protecting it with steel jaws? He put the deer out of its misery, his knife quick and silent, but his eyes were locked on the barrier. Planks of wood, gray and splintered by 100 winters. Iron bars, pitted with rust. It looked like an old mine, sealed up and forgotten decades ago. But Crow had spent 30 years reading the land, and the land never lied. The hardware was new. The bolts holding the bars had fresh tool marks. The hinges, hidden beneath the rust, were slick with new oil. This wasn't abandoned, it was disguised. Someone had gone to an incredible amount of trouble to make this place look like a tomb while keeping it very much alive. The kind of effort that screamed a secret valuable enough to hide, a secret valuable enough to kill for. Crow scanned the ground. The snow was disturbed, but not just by the deer. Boot prints. Multiple sets, coming and going. The newest tracks were less than a day old, the edges still sharp against the powder. Someone was here. Recently. He put a hand on one of the iron bars, pushed steady. It gave just a fraction of an inch, and he heard it. A soft click. A hidden mechanism. This wasn't just a barrier. It was a lock. A massive, complicated lock, disguised as a ruin. He knew then, standing in the cold mountain air with blood on his hands, that he should turn around. Walk away. Secrets this well kept were kept by dangerous men. Men who broke laws that carried a heavy price. Getting involved meant trouble with the law, or worse, with the men who thought they were the law. But 30 years on the frontier had also taught him something else. Trouble and opportunity were often two sides of the same coin, and Crow Blackwell had always been a gambling man. He spent 10 minutes studying the bars, tracing the lines, feeling the tension in the metal. It was a sequence lock, a puzzle made of iron and timber. You had to push the right bars in the right order. A fool would try to force it. A wise man would listen to it. He dragged the deer out of sight, then went to work. The first attempt did nothing. The second, the same. But on the third try, pressing 3 specific points in a slow, steady rhythm, he heard a series of deep, satisfying clicks. The entire wall of wood and iron swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. It opened into a tunnel, a black maw leading into the heart of the mountain. The air that drifted out was cool and dry, not the damp, musty smell of a forgotten mine. And the inside, unlike the weathered exterior, was pristine. The tunnel was wide, reinforced with heavy, newly cut timber supports. The floor was smooth-packed earth, worn down by constant traffic. Along the walls, lanterns hung on iron hooks, their glass clean, their reservoirs full of fresh oil. Someone wasn't just working here, they were investing, heavily. Crow took one of the lanterns, sparked a match, and let the light push back the oppressive dark. He started walking. The passage sloped gently down, following a natural fissure that had been expertly widened. Drainage channels were cut into the floor, a smart design to keep the tunnels from flooding. This was professional work. 20 yards in, he found an alcove carved into the wall. It held a wooden crate secured with a heavy modern padlock. Through the slats he could see the shine of metal tools, saws, hammers, pickaxes, all of them new, all of them carefully maintained. This place was an active, thriving operation. The tunnel branched, splitting into a complex network of passages. He saw storage areas, workspaces, even what looked like crude living quarters carved out of the rock. This wasn't some simple prospector's dig. This was an underground fortress. Fresh tool marks scored the walls. New wood shavings lay near the support beams. They were still expanding, still digging deeper. Then he heard it. Voices. They were faint, echoing from somewhere deep within the maze of tunnels. He couldn't make out the words, but it was a quiet conversation. A man and a woman. The sound confirmed it. The mine was active. Right now. Crow blew out his lantern, plunging himself into absolute blackness. He pressed a hand to the cold stone wall and moved forward, silent as a ghost. The voices grew louder, clearer. They were talking about work schedules, ore quality. They spoke with the easy familiarity of partners, of people who had spent a long, long time working together in secret. Then he heard a name that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Marshall Kane. They were afraid of him, afraid of what he might do to their operation. Crow crept closer, using the deep shadows cast by the support timbers for cover. He rounded a bend in the tunnel and saw light ahead. It spilled out from a large natural chamber that had been turned into a full-scale mine. And what he saw in that chamber explained everything. It explained the disguise, the traps, the secrecy. It explained the fear in their voices. They weren't just digging for silver. They had found the mother lode. A river of silver. A fortune so vast it could make kings out of paupers. A fortune that could get you killed. He pressed himself flat against the tunnel wall, the cold stone seeping through his coat. The voices had stopped. Now, all he heard was the rhythmic chink of a pickaxe striking rock, followed by the scrape of a shovel. Whoever was in there, they knew their business. The sound was too steady, too efficient for an amateur. This was the sound of someone who had been breaking rock their entire life. He moved toward the light, a moth drawn to a dangerous flame. The passage opened into a massive natural cavern, lit by 3 bright lanterns. The place was a proper mine. Pickaxes, shovels, ore carts, even a sluice box for separating the silver from the rock. Everything you'd need for a commercial operation. And it was all hidden inside a mountain the world had been told was worthless. 2 people were working at the far end of the cavern, their backs to him. One was a woman, her dark hair tied back, swinging a pickaxe with a strength that belied her slender frame. The other was an older man, gray-bearded and wiry, carefully sorting chunks of ore. Crow recognized him instantly, and his blood ran cold. It was Ezra Whitmore, the quiet merchant from the valley town. For 5 years Ezra had been buying supplies, always paying with silver coins that were just a little too pure, always asking questions. Who was new in the area? Who was passing through? Who might cause trouble for a man who just wanted his privacy? It had been a front, a carefully constructed lie. All this time, Ezra had been using his shop as a cover while he pulled a king's ransom out of a mountain that, officially, didn't exist. But the question remained. Why the secrecy? If the claim was legal, why hide it? The woman turned, and the lantern light caught her face. She was young, maybe 25, with a face weathered by the elements. But her eyes were sharp, intelligent. She was no simple laborer. "Someone's been in the tunnel," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the cavern. She didn't even stop her work. Fresh boot prints in the main passage. Ezra looked up, his friendly merchant face gone, replaced by a mask of sharp concern. "How fresh?" "Still wet from the snowmelt," she answered. "Recent enough that whoever it is might still be here." In a single fluid motion, they both dropped their tools and reached for rifles leaning against the cavern wall. They moved like soldiers, practiced and efficient. They had prepared for this moment. They had been waiting for it. They knew he was here, and they were ready to kill him. Crow stepped out of the tunnel, his hands held high and away from his body. He knew any sudden move would be his last. Both rifles snapped up, barrels pointed directly at his chest. They were rock steady. The woman's finger was tight on the trigger, but her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were filled with cold calculation. She was sizing him up, weighing the threat. "Easy there," Crow said, his voice low and calm. "I'm not looking for trouble. Just followed a blood trail to your front door." Ezra kept his rifle aimed squarely at Crow's heart, his eyes squinting in the lantern light. Then, a slow flicker of recognition. It was followed by something that looked almost like relief. "You're Blackwell, the drifter, the one who helped the Morrison family last winter." "You know me," Crow stated, not a question. "Word gets around," Ezra said, his rifle dipping just a fraction. "You stopped those claim jumpers from burning them out. Question is, what do you plan to do now that you've found us?" The woman, however, kept her rifle locked on him. She was clearly the less trusting of the two. "He could be working for them, Ezra. He could be scouting for Marshall Kane." That name again. Marshall Kane. He was the law in 3 counties. He had jurisdiction over every mining claim, every survey. If Kane was involved, this wasn't just about privacy. This was about hiding from the law itself. A crooked lawman. "I don't work for anyone," Crow said, his voice hard. "Especially not for corrupt marshals. But I am curious why you're mining a claim that isn't supposed to exist." Ezra shared a look with the woman. A silent conversation passed between them in a single glance. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Ezra finally lowered his rifle. "Because officially," he said, his voice laced with bitterness, "this mountain is worthless. The territorial survey confirmed it 5 years ago. Nothing but granite." He gestured to a pile of ore, glittering with veins of pure silver. "That deer you were tracking found one of our traps. We set them to keep people away, to protect this." "You're pulling a fortune out of here," Crow observed. "For how long?" 2 years, Ezra admitted. "It started when I found the old survey equipment, stashed in the main tunnel." He picked up a chunk of ore. "Someone surveyed this area 25 years ago, found one of the richest silver veins in Colorado. Then they buried their report and filed a false one." The woman stepped forward, her rifle still held ready. "I'm Ruth Morrison. We heard the entrance lock trigger an hour ago. We've been waiting to see who else knew the secret." Crow's eyebrows shot up. "Any relation to the family I helped?" "My uncle," she said, her voice tight with anger. "And those claim jumpers who tried to burn him out? They were working for the same people who buried that survey. The same people who want this mountain for themselves." The pieces were clicking into place. A massive, ugly picture was starting to form. "There's a conspiracy," Ruth said, the words spitting from her lips like venom, "to control every valuable piece of land in this territory. They use false surveys to hide the wealth. Then they use men like those claim jumpers to scare people off. They buy the land for nothing, knowing it's worth a fortune." "Marshall Kane," Crow said. It all came back to him. "Kane's just the muscle," Ezra cut in. "The real power is a man named Marcus Webb, the territorial commissioner. He controls the survey office, the land grants, the banks, even the railroad contracts. He's been stealing this territory blind for years." Now, Crow understood the rifles. He understood the fear. If Webb and Kane found this mine, Ruth and Ezra wouldn't just lose their silver. They'd lose their lives. They'd become just another pair of unfortunate souls who met with an accident on the frontier. And Crow Blackwell had just walked right into the middle of it. He was a witness, and in Marcus Webb's world, witnesses didn't live long. Ruth set her rifle down and moved to a heavy wooden crate. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of documents: survey reports, land deeds, letters, and financial records. She pulled out a thick folder and spread the papers on a makeshift table. "We've been gathering evidence," she said, her voice low and intense. "Every crooked deal, every fake survey, every family Webb has cheated. It's bigger than just this silver mine. It's everything." Crow leaned over the table, the lantern light illuminating the staggering scale of the fraud. Webb had manipulated surveys across thousands of acres. He'd hidden gold deposits, rich farmland, and vital water sources. The silver mine they were standing in was just one piece of a much larger, more rotten puzzle. There were at least a dozen other hidden claims, all owned by Webb's cronies. "How did you get all this?" Crow asked, his voice a whisper. "Ezra's been at it for years," Ruth explained. He saw the pattern. Good families, hard-working folks, suddenly losing their homesteads. It was always the same story: a bad survey, a sudden debt, and a forced sale to one of Webb's men. A few months later, a miracle discovery of gold or silver that the survey somehow missed. Ezra pointed to a map, crisscrossed with lines and notes. It showed the true mineral wealth of the region, a stark contrast to the official government maps. "Webb's building an empire on stolen land," he said grimly. "He controls the surveys that hide the wealth, the banks that force the sales, and the railroad contracts that make the land valuable. He's got a stranglehold on this whole territory, and Kane is his enforcer." "Anyone who fights back," Ruth added, "anyone who asks too many questions, they get harassed. They face trumped-up charges, or worse. My uncle's family was lucky. Others just disappeared." Crow studied the financial records. The numbers were astronomical. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal profits already, with millions more to come. But then he saw something else. A document, separate from the others. A memo outlining a future plan, an expansion, and a final, brutal step to secure the empire. "According to this," Crow said slowly, his finger tracing a line of text, "Webb is planning to tie up all the loose ends, next month." He looked up at them, his eyes dark. "He's arranged for Kane to conduct a sweep of the entire valley. The official reason is to clear out squatters. The real reason is to silence anyone who knows the truth." Ruth and Ezra exchanged a look of pure terror. They knew they were in danger, but they never realized the clock was ticking so fast. They were no longer just collecting evidence. They were targets on a list. "We have to get this to someone who can stop him," Ezra said, his voice strained. "But everyone in the territorial government is in Webb's pocket." "What about federal authorities?" Crow suggested. "Webb's got connections in Denver, even Washington," Ruth said, gathering the documents, her hands shaking slightly. "This conspiracy goes all the way to the top. We need someone outside the system. Someone Webb can't buy and Kane can't intimidate." As she spoke, a new sound reached them, faint but unmistakable, carried through the rock of the mountain itself. The sound of horses. Many of them. Riding hard. Ruth grabbed her rifle. Ezra scrambled to douse the lanterns, plunging the cavern into near darkness. "Kane," Ezra whispered, the single word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Someone must have seen you enter the tunnel." They were trapped, a mile underground, with an army of killers about to storm their only exit. The evidence that could bring down an empire was right here, in this cavern. And so were the men who would kill them all to keep it buried. But Kane had made one mistake. He assumed Crow Blackwell was just another drifter. He didn't know that Crow knew these mountains better than any man alive. He didn't know that for every door you see, there's always another way out. "Grab the most important papers," Crow snapped, his voice a low command in the darkness. He stuffed maps and ledgers into a canvas sack while Ruth and Ezra scrambled to hide their equipment. The sound of the horses was closer now, the shouts of men echoing down the tunnel. Kane had brought a posse. "There's a fissure," Crow explained, his words coming fast. "About 200 yards deeper in. Opens onto the north face hidden by a rockfall. It was a bear den, but the bear died last winter." Ruth shouldered her rifle and a small bag with the most critical evidence. "How do you know about it?" "Tracked a wounded cat through there last year," Crow said, blowing out the last lantern. It connects to this system, but we have to move. Now. Just then, a loud clang echoed from the far end of the tunnel. The entrance. Kane's men had figured out the mechanism. They were inside. They ran, plunging deeper into the mountain, guided only by Crow's memory and the feel of the rock wall. The mine was a labyrinth, a complex network of shafts and tunnels that followed the silver veins for nearly a mile. Behind them, they could hear the heavy thud of boots and the shouted orders of Kane's men spreading through the complex. They were being hunted. "They'll find the main cavern any minute," Ezra panted as they scrambled up a narrow, steep passage. 2 years of work. Gone. "Equipment can be replaced," Ruth said, her voice grim. "This can't be." She clutched the bag of documents to her chest. "This evidence can give dozens of families their lives back." The passage grew steeper, becoming a natural chimney in the rock. They climbed, using handholds Crow seemed to find in the pitch-black darkness. The air grew fresher, carrying the scent of pine and snow. "How much further?" Ruth gasped, her lungs burning. 30 feet to the opening," Crow said, his voice echoing down to them. "But there's a problem." He had stopped on a narrow ledge above them. "The exit is on a sheer cliff face. It's a straight drop. We'll need rope to get down." From below, the sounds of the search party grew louder, closer. They could hear Kane's voice, barking orders. They had minutes, maybe less, before they were found. "Got it," Ezra said, a grin in his voice despite the terror. He unslung his pack and pulled out a tightly coiled rope. Miner's habit. Never go underground without a rope. The opening was perfectly hidden behind a jumble of fallen rocks and dead trees. Crow squeezed through first, securing the rope to a solid rock anchor. Below them, the north face of the mountain dropped away into a sea of storm clouds. A blizzard was rolling in. Ruth went next, the bag of evidence clutched tight as she rappelled down the icy cliff. That bag held years of their lives and the hopes of countless cheated families. It was more precious than all the silver in the mountain. Ezra followed, his movements slow but steady. As they descended, the voices from inside the mine carried on the thin mountain air. "Check every passage!" Kane roared. "They couldn't have gone far." Crow hit the bottom first, quickly coiling the rope. The storm was breaking, heavy snowflakes beginning to fall. It would make their escape harder, but it would also cover their tracks. "Where to now?" Ruth asked as her feet hit the ground. Every direction led through territory controlled by Kane. "Denver," Crow said, without a moment's hesitation. "We take this to the federal authorities. Webb might own the territory, but he doesn't own Washington." "Denver is 100 miles away," Ezra said grimly. "Kane will have men in every town, watching every road between here and there." "Then we don't take the roads," Crow replied, a hard glint in his eye. "I know trails through the high country most men have never seen. Kane's men will be watching the easy paths." The first snowflakes of the blizzard began to fall as they reached the tree line. Behind them, up on the mountain, a new series of shouts erupted. Kane had found the main cavern. He had seen the scale of their operation. He knew now what they had, and the hunt would become relentless. He'll send riders to every sheriff, every marshal, every man who owes Webb a favor, Ruth said, pulling her coat tight against the biting wind. "Good," Crow said, shouldering his pack. "Let them watch the roads. By the time they realize we're not on them, we'll be 20 miles into the wilderness." The storm hit like a fist. The world dissolved into a howling whiteness, the landscape a shifting maze of snowdrifts and ice. Crow led them along a barely there game trail that clung to the base of the cliffs, the wind a physical force trying to tear them from the mountain. The snow was already over their ankles and falling fast. Ruth struggled, the heavy bag of documents feeling like a bag of rocks. It was their salvation and their anchor, slowing them down with every step. "How far to shelter?" she shouted over the wind. 3 miles! Crow yelled back, his words whipped away by the gale. "An old trapper's cabin I built years ago, stocked with food and firewood." Ezra was falling behind, his age and an old mining injury making every step an agony. The cold was sinking into his bones. "Just need to keep moving," he gritted out, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Stopping is a death sentence. Behind them, even through the storm's roar, they heard it. Gunshots. Kane's men signaling to each other, coordinating their search. They were closer than Crow had expected. The game trail curved around a massive granite outcropping, giving them a moment's respite from the wind. Crow scanned the terrain, his face grim. "We have to reach that cabin before dark," he said. "This trail runs along the edge of a gorge. In the dark, one wrong step is the last one you'll take." Ruth checked the documents, her fingers numb with cold, making sure the oilcloth was holding. "How long until Kane figures out we took the high trail?" "He's probably figured it out already," Crow admitted. "But his men aren't equipped for this. They're road riders, not mountain trackers." Then another sound cut through the storm, a sound that turned Crow's blood to ice. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the baying of hounds. "Tracker dogs," Ezra said, his face ashen. "From the territorial prison, they can follow a scent through anything, even this." The game was over. Snow wouldn't hide them, the wind wouldn't cover their trail, the dogs would lead Kane right to them. Crow didn't hesitate. He changed direction instantly, plunging them off the trail and down a steep, treacherous bank toward a creek raging with snowmelt. The water would be freezing, the rocks slick with ice, but it was their only chance. "Stay in the water," he ordered as they scrambled down into the torrent. "It'll break the scent trail. It's the only way to lose the dogs." The creek was a nightmare. The current tore at their legs, the icy water stealing all warmth. Ruth slipped twice, saved only by Ezra's grip. They pushed on, mile after grueling mile, the baying of the hounds growing fainter, but never disappearing completely. Kane's men were relentless. "There!" Crow pointed to a cluster of pines where the creek bent sharply. "We can get out there. The rock will hide our tracks, and the pine needles will mask the scent." They climbed out, their legs numb and useless, and onto a long granite ledge. The hard rock took no prints. The wind howled around them. As darkness finally fell, they saw it through the swirling snow. The trapper's cabin, a single room of logs, a promise of warmth and life. But there was smoke coming from the chimney. Someone was already inside. Crow threw up a hand, stopping them in the trees. Light flickered in the single window. Shadows moved inside, at least 2 people. Were they friends? Or had Kane's men circled around and set a trap? "Could be them," Ruth whispered, her rifle ready. "Could just be other travelers," Ezra said, his hope thin. Walking into that cabin could be the end of everything. But staying out here in the blizzard was certain death. The temperature was plummeting. They wouldn't last the night. "I'll check it out," Crow decided. "Give me 10 minutes. If I don't give the all-clear signal, you take the documents and you run. Follow the creek to the river, head for the trading post at Miller's Crossing." He handed Ruth his rifle and melted into the storm, a shadow against the snow. Through the frosted window, he saw 2 figures by the fire. An old man with a white beard, cleaning a rifle. A younger woman sorting supplies. Their clothes were wrong for Kane's men. They looked like civilians. He crept to the door and tapped softly, his hand on his pistol. The movement inside stopped. "Who's out there?" A man's voice called. "Travelers," Crow replied. "Caught in the storm." The door creaked open. The face that appeared in the lamplight was weathered, intelligent, and instantly recognizable. It was Thomas Harper, a former territorial judge. A man forced out of his job 2 years ago because he refused to sign off on Marcus Webb's crooked land seizures. His daughter, Margaret, a schoolteacher, stood behind him. "Crow Blackwell," Harper said, his eyes wide with shock. "What in God's name are you doing out in this?" "Running from Marshal Kane," Crow said, cutting straight to the point. "We have something he and his boss would kill to get back." Harper's expression hardened. He knew exactly what Crow meant. He stepped aside. "You're not alone, are you?" Crow signaled, and Ruth and Ezra stumbled out of the darkness, half frozen and exhausted. Inside, the warmth was a shock to their systems. Introductions were made quickly. Harper took one look at the documents and his face went pale. His legal mind instantly grasped the sheer scale of the evidence. "This is it," he breathed, holding a forged deed. "This is enough to burn Webb's entire empire to the ground." He looked up, his eyes blazing with a fire they hadn't held in years. "But getting it to the right people. Webb has eyes and ears everywhere." "We're heading to Denver," Ruth said, "to the federal authorities." "There's a federal land commissioner there," Harper said, his voice quickening with excitement. "Judge Morrison, an honest man. I know him. He's been investigating Webb for months, but he has no proof. This is the proof." Just then, the baying of the hounds echoed through the valley again. Closer. Much closer. "They're less than an hour behind us," Ezra estimated, his ear cocked to the wind. Harper moved to the window. "There's another trail. North from here. It's harder, more dangerous, but it connects to the main road 20 miles from Denver. Kane will never expect you to take it." He blew out the lamps, banking the fire to a dull glow. They sat in the dark, listening as the sounds of the posse grew steadily louder. They could hear the jingle of harnesses, the snorting of horses, the shouts of men. "How many?" Harper whispered. "At least 8, Ruth replied. "Probably more." "Too many to fight," Crow said. "We have to be smarter." They could hear Kane's voice now, directing his men to surround the cabin. Torchlight danced in the trees. "Back room," Crow hissed, pushing Ruth and Ezra toward a small storage area. Harper had a false wall, a space hidden behind a stack of firewood. A perfect hiding spot. Margaret frantically rearranged cups and plates, making it look like only 2 people were in the cabin. A heavy fist hammered on the door. "Open up! Marshal Kane! Territorial Authority!" Harper opened the door, a look of mild annoyance on his face. "Marshal? What brings you out in this weather?" Kane shoved past him, his men crowding in behind, their clothes caked with snow. "Looking for fugitives," Kane snarled. "3 of them. Seen anyone?" "Haven't seen a soul since the storm hit," Harper replied smoothly. Kane's men began to search the small cabin. One of them picked up a 3rd cup Margaret had missed. "Looks like you had company, Judge," the deputy said, a smirk on his face. Kane's eyes narrowed. "Judge Harper, isn't it? I thought you were retired." "Visiting family?" Harper said calmly. "And the cup?" Margaret stepped forward. "I get nervous in storms, Marshal. I keep making coffee and forgetting I already have some." Kane wasn't buying it. He knew something was off. He paced the small room like a caged wolf. His men had checked everywhere. There was nowhere to hide. He was about to give the order to leave when one of the hounds, brought inside from the cold, began to bark frantically. It was barking at the back wall, at the stack of firewood. The dog had their scent. Kane drew his pistol, the click of the hammer deafeningly loud in the small cabin. The hound was going wild now, clawing at the logs. "There's someone behind that wall," Kane said, his voice deadly quiet. "Call them out, Judge, or my men will tear this place apart log by log." Harper stood his ground. "That dog is smelling ghosts, Marshal. Travelers use this cabin all winter." "Dogs don't bark at old scents," Kane growled, moving toward the firewood. He started pulling logs away. Behind the wall, in the pitch-black, freezing cold space, Crow knew it was over. They were caught. Kane had men at the door, men at the window. There was no escape. But as Kane's hands found the edge of the hidden panel, Crow made a choice. If they were going down, They were going down fighting. With a roar, he burst through the wall, an explosion of firewood and splinters. He crashed into the nearest deputy, catching everyone by surprise. Ruth and Ezra were right behind him, clutching the documents, scrambling for the back window. The cabin erupted into chaos. Gunshots blasted, shattering the night. Harper and Margaret dropped to the floor. Crow ripped the rifle from the deputy's hands and used the butt to smash the rear window. Glass flew into the snow. Ruth dove through the opening, Ezra right behind her. Kane fired twice, the bullet splintering the wood inches from Crow's head. "Stop them!" he bellowed, but the cabin was too small, too crowded. Crow vaulted through the shattered window, rolling into the deep snow as another shot rang out. The blizzard swallowed them whole. They ran, knee-deep in powder, toward the dark embrace of the forest. Behind them, Kane's voice was a furious roar, lost in the howl of the wind. They had the evidence. They were free. But Denver was still 100 miles away, through a frozen wilderness, with a killer and his posse on their heels. The chase wasn't over. It had just begun. 3 days later, they stood in the federal courthouse in Denver. They were bruised, frostbitten, and exhausted, but they were alive. And the evidence was spread across the desk of Judge Morrison. Forged deeds, bribery records, the entire sordid story of Marcus Webb's criminal empire. "This is extraordinary," Morrison said, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and triumph. He held up a letter with Webb's official seal. "With this, I can issue federal arrest warrants immediately." Harper's route had been perfect. They had navigated the treacherous high country, avoiding every roadblock, every patrol. They arrived in Denver just as Webb was about to sign the papers on his biggest land grab yet. Federal marshals stormed Webb's office within the hour. He was arrested, caught completely off guard, with even more incriminating documents on his desk. Kane's authority was stripped, his men powerless against the federal government. "What about the families?" Ruth asked, as she watched Marcus Webb being led away in chains. "Every fraudulent sale will be reversed," Morrison promised. "Every family will get their land back, with compensation. Your uncle's homestead is safe." Ezra leaned on his walking stick, a slow smile spreading across his weary face. 2 years, he said softly. "It was all worth it." Morrison turned to Crow. "The federal government owes you a great debt, Mr. Blackwell. You've exposed a cancer in this territory." "Just did what needed doing," Crow said, his gaze drifting toward the distant, snow-capped mountains. On the courthouse steps, Ruth and Ezra made plans to return to their valley, to their mine, which could now be operated legally, bringing prosperity to the whole region. "What about you, Crow?" Ruth asked. "Will you stay?" He looked at the mountains, at the endless wilderness that stretched beyond them. He thought of the hidden tunnel, of the darkness and the silver, of the fight for justice. "Reckon I'll keep moving," he said. "Lot of country out there, lot of folks who might need a hand." 6 months later, the newspapers were full of the verdicts. 23 territorial officials were convicted. Over 300 families had their land restored. Marshal Kane was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Marcus Webb got 25. Crow Blackwell was never seen in that part of Colorado again. But the stories, they lingered. The story of the drifter who stumbled into a conspiracy and refused to look away. The man who risked it all to see that justice was done. The tunnel in the mountain was sealed for good, a silent monument to the greed it had hidden and the courage it had revealed. If you enjoyed this Wild West tale, click the video on your screen now to watch another gripping frontier story where justice and courage face impossible odds. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Your support helps us keep these stories of the Old West alive.